All right, well, welcome everyone. My name's Emily Andrews. I'm the Executive Director of the U.S. Green Building Council, Missouri Gateway Chapter, and I'm pleased to be here today to co-present this Basics of Benchmarking and BEPS, the Building Energy Performance Standard, with the, sorry, hold on, my, okay. That's a little echo. That's a little. Stop. Sorry, those are all like YouTube videos just randomly playing in the background of my computer. So taking care of that. Apologies. And we're going to go back to screen sharing and this from the beginning. All right, here we are again. The basics of benchmarking and BEPS that we're co-presenting with the City of St. Louis Building Division. Here is our agenda today. We'll do a quick welcome and introductions from the city staff. We're going to talk about why buildings are important and why we want to benchmark their energy use. We'll give a brief overview of the benchmarking process, and then cover some background on the Building Energy Performance Standard, and then talk about the Performance Standard compliance pathway and timeline. And then we should have some time for questions. If folks do want to drop questions into the chat during the presentation, you are welcome to do that, and we'll try to answer those kind of as we go. And then we can also have time at the end as well. So that's kind of what we're going to cover today. And I do want to just, I think we have too many people to go through and do introductions of everyone, but if you want to introduce yourself in the chat, that would be great. And then I would like Rajiv and his team and the team from the city to introduce themselves before we get started. So Rajiv.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Rajiv Ravalapati. I am the program manager for the Office of Building Performance that oversees the compliance of both benchmarking and BEPS. But I'm actually handing off my duties to one of our other employees, Katerina. She's going to be the interim program manager for this office going forward. I'll let Katerina and James introduce themselves.
Great. Hello, Katerina.
Hello, everyone. My name is Katerina Mikhailova, and I'm going to be interim manager starting tomorrow for the office. We have 2 employees, and we're going to be able to help you with the questions you have, and our contact information will be in the end of the slide. Thank you.
Great. James?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm one of those 2 employees in the Office of Building Performance. My name is James Kelly, and I'm helping to ensure compliance, to analyze data, and to generally just improve the program in any ways that I can to make it easy to use and effective. So happy to be here, and I hope to get all of your questions because it helps everybody.
Great, thank you so much. I will just add that this is Rajiv's last day with the city, which means this is the last time I get to co-present with him, and I'm getting kind of sad. But I'm going to jump in and talk a little bit about why we're really here today talking about buildings and building energy use and benchmarking. And it's because buildings have a big impact. Buildings represent about 40% of the greenhouse gas emissions in the United States. This is residential and commercial buildings combined. And in the city of St. Louis, that impact is even greater. This is an image from the city of St. Louis's 2018 greenhouse gas emission inventory. And you can see that the commercial and residential buildings make up about 65% of the greenhouse gas emissions. If you throw industrial in there, you're looking at 80%. And that is really a lot, a large contribution. And this is not an uncommon breakdown for greenhouse gas emissions in urban areas and cities across the country, because what do you see when you walk outside? You see buildings, they're everywhere. It's where we're spending 90% of our time. And they're an important aspect of our day-to-day lives. And this also means that there's an opportunity for savings. And that's kind of how I like to think of this. It could be overwhelming, but I think there's a huge opportunity to make our buildings better while also protecting the environment. And we can do that through energy savings. According to the EPA, about 30% of energy used in buildings is wasted simply through inefficiency. I like to think of when I was a kid and sat in front of the refrigerator with an open door looking for something to eat and my mom yelling at me. That's inefficiency, keeping that fridge door open all the time. Half of all energy savings are possible through low or no cost operational improvements. And benchmarking is really the first step to saving energy, water, and money. And this is the definition that we use for benchmarking. It is tracking your building's energy use and then comparing that performance to the past and to similar buildings. And that is the definition that the standard definition we like to use for benchmarking. Just a little bit of context as to why why existing building policies are important in the city of St. Louis. This is an image of the city's climate protection initiative, which is kind of looking at a lot of different ways to address reducing greenhouse gas emissions, carbon emissions, and you can see that building efficiency plays a role here. So this is an opportunity to reduce our building's impact on the environment. It's an opportunity to stay competitive with other cities and regions throughout the country. It supports the building division's goal to maintain and improve our building stock. And it's really critical to help the city meet their climate goals to be carbon neutral by 2050. We're going to be talking about two different requirements today, the benchmarking requirements and the building energy performance standard. We'll start with the benchmarking requirements. The Building Energy Awareness Ordinance, which we just call the benchmarking requirement most of the time, or the benchmarking ordinance, was passed and signed in 2017. And it requires municipal and private buildings over 50,000 square feet to track and report their energy and water use annually. And this includes multifamily buildings, institutional buildings, municipal buildings, commercial buildings, anything over 50,000 square feet. Of course, there's always the opportunity for exemptions. If a building has low occupancy, if it's a manufacturing facility, if there's some sort of financial duress or bankruptcy, and then if it's a state or federal building, they don't have to actually comply with local ordinances, though we do encourage them to do so. If a building does not comply with benchmarking, they are not eligible for new residential or commercial occupancy permits, if that's something that comes up. And the deadline for reporting is May 1st for the previous calendar year. So May 1st of 2022, you're reporting your 2021 data. And we have been offering training since 2017 to help people comply with this ordinance. This is one of those trainings, and there's also one-on-one assistance available. USGBC can help you out, but also the Office of Building Performance, Katerina and James can help you out as well. Whoops, I don't want to miss that slide. Just a little more context. This is not a trend. There are cities across the country that are requiring benchmarking, and even some states. So St. Louis is just one of many that have this kind of legislation on the books. Kansas City has passed legislation. Des Moines, Chicago was among one of the earliest adopters of this. So it's a really common best practice in building management, and it's not going away. So I'm going to talk us through an overview of the benchmarking process. This is, I don't want to say it's high level, but it's not as detailed as some of the trainings that we've provided in the past. We do have a benchmarking 101 session that we recorded on YouTube that's available if people want to dig in deeper. And there are also a lot of resources available through Energy Star Portfolio Manager. So just want to point out that there there's lots of information out there that can help you through this process. First, I'd like to point out that this is the city's kind of go-to for all the information that you need related to benchmarking, stlbenchmarking.com. There's lots of great resources here, and you'll use this site to actually link to how you report your data. But the tool that we use to track, to do the benchmarking is Energy Star Portfolio Manager. And this is a free tool that was developed by the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the Department of Energy at the national level. It's managed by EPA, and about, something like 50% of commercial buildings in the United States are using this to track at least their energy, but you can also use it to track water, and you can use it to track waste. And the phrase that we like to bring up quite a bit is you can't manage what you don't measure. So that's the tool that we're going to be talking about today. And within Energy Star Portfolio Manager, there are several different ways to benchmark your energy performance. The first is an Energy Star score, which I'll talk about more in a minute. Also national medians, which I'll cover. But you can also benchmark your performance and compare it to similar buildings. So if you were like a school district, you could, benchmark all your buildings and kind of compare and contrast how they're doing, and use that to guide investment in your building, or maybe which building is the one that needs the most help because it's performing the worst. You can also compare to past performance, and then you can set a target performance in Portfolio Manager as well. So just to touch base a little bit more on the Energy Star score, this is a 1 to 100 score where 1 is kind of the worst performing building and 100 is the best. If you're somewhere in the 1 to 50 range, that means your building is performing kind of on the lower end, but it also means there's an opportunity to invest in your building. And this is where you can see the greatest return on investment in this area. And then if you're at 50, you're right in the middle. Your building is performing better than 50% of comparable buildings and worse than the other 50%. And then between 50 and 75, that means there may be some room for improvement. And if you are at 75 or above, this means that you are performing, you're in the top 25%, and you're eligible for an Energy Star certification. If that's something that you'd be that you want to, put a little label on your building that you're doing well. I do want to point out that these scores are normalized for building size and occupancy and weather. So you're not punished for being in a cold winter, hot summer climate like we are here. The other way to track performance is through national medians. And this is in Portfolio Manager, this shows up as energy use intensity, which is the amount of energy you're using per square foot. And you can, again, this gets normalized for weather and occupancy and all those good things. And this can give you a sense of, if you can't get an Energy Star score, which not all buildings can, this can still give you a sense of how you're performing compared to similar buildings. So here you can see it's showing a baseline EUI and a current EUI. So this building has actually improved over time, and it's doing better than, it's 10% higher than the median, doing better than 10% higher than the median. I will point out that it can get confusing. The Energy Star score, the 1 to 100 score, higher is better. In energy use intensity, lower is better, because you want your energy use per square foot to be lower. So just want to point that one thing out about metrics. So this is the process of benchmarking your building. It's there's a quick start guide that Portfolio Manager provides, and I will do a follow-up email after this to share these slides, as well as some of the resources that we discuss here. But the very basic process is that you're logging in, you're adding a property and some information about that. You're adding meters, your energy meters. and then you're adding the data, and then you have the opportunity to review the results. So I like to walk through this really simple step because it's not rocket science and you shouldn't be intimidated by it. And the other thing that I'll point out again is that Energy Star provides a ton of trainings. There's a link here, pre-recorded stuff that's on demand, but also they do live trainings as well. They do a Portfolio Manager 101 every month that's available for free. So I encourage people to take a look at the training that's out there. The second part, once you've benchmarked your building, you have to report that data to the city. And they've provided a checklist, which is available at stlbenchmarking.com. We will talk through this process as well, but once you've followed the steps to benchmark, then you want to check for errors. You want to make sure you've added your unique St. Louis building ID, and then you generate and submit your report to the city. So again, pretty simple steps. We'll walk through them in a little bit more detail. So the first part is creating your account. If you don't have an Energy Star Portfolio Manager account, you'll go to energystar.gov/benchmark and set up an account. I will say this first part of the presentation about setting up your property, you only have to do this once, right? You only have to set up the property once, and then it's just adding the data. So if your building has been benchmarked before or has reported data before, this step has been done. And you want to try to connect to the existing account. So you're signing up or you're logging in, and then you're adding a property in Portfolio Manager. You'll click on this kind of takes you through a set of prompts as you set up the building. And once you've added your property, you'll go to the next part of the process, which is setting up the property. So you're selecting the property's primary function. You're selecting the number of buildings. This is, sometimes one. If you have multiple buildings or a campus, you might have more than one. And then you want to select your construction status, which for all of you is most likely, if you have to comply with benchmarking, is going to be an existing building. So this is again, we're kind of walking through some of the basic steps, but then once you've done that, you click on the Get Started button, and you'll move on to the next step. So some of the things that are this is the information that's required for all properties: your property name, address, gross floor area, the year built, the occupancy percentage, the number of buildings, and then for the compliance side of things, you have to enter your unique St. Louis building benchmarking ID, which if you don't have it, you can find at stlbenchmarking.com. So just to touch base on the definition of gross floor area, because this is an important metric, and you want to try to get it right if you can. This is the total property square footage between the exterior walls of the building. So it includes all the finished areas, including support areas like elevator shafts, stairwells, mechanical spaces, basements, etc. And just want to be clear that it is not the same as rentable or leasable space. So it's the total square footage. And in general, you don't want to include parking square footage in your gross floor area. If you don't know this information about your building, you can find it in life safety drawings, architectural plans. You can actually physically measure the space. We've had students do this at schools before when they were benchmarking their buildings. And as I mentioned, this is an important piece of data to get right. It impacts your energy metric, so you want to try to get it right the first time. There is you can enter a temporary value when you're setting up the building, but you want to confirm that before you submit your data. So once you've, so here's what the screen looks like when you're entering your basic building information. You're putting, like I mentioned, the name, the address, the year built. Again, want to point out on occupancy that this is the percentage of your gross floor area that's occupied and operational. It's required that you actually enter a number here, but it doesn't impact your Energy Star score or metrics. So you want to enter your best guess and move on. I mean, for example, if you've got a 10-story office building and only 9 floors are occupied, then you've got 90% occupancy. There are some prompts, again, in Portfolio Manager that can help you through the process. You know, there are lots of definitions that are provided and things like that. So just want to make sure that you don't overthink things sometimes too in Portfolio Manager. You'll be prompted to check some different, so check off some different information about your property, like if there's a parking garage, a pool, a retail store, you would check off that these apply to your property. And we just want to note here that if you separately meter your parking area, you should not include them in the square footage for your property. And this is because Energy Star is really about the building and not the parking. So you don't want to include it if it's metered separately. If it's not possible to sub-meter it, Portfolio Manager will estimate the energy that parking uses and then subtract that out before calculating your metrics. So there are some things that happen on the back end there. So you'll also be asked to provide the next step is adding some use details. So I mentioned gross floor area is required for all buildings. You'll probably be asked about weekly operating hours, depending on the type of building you are, the number of workers on your shift. Some of these can differ for different kinds of buildings. And I will also point out that anything that you see underlined in blue in Portfolio Manager, if you put your mouse over that, we're not live, this is a PowerPoint. But if you were live in Portfolio Manager, a definition would pop up. And there's just hundreds of definitions, like I said, that can be found throughout the tool that can help you if you have questions. This is just an example of additional property details that might be necessary depending on the type of building that you have. If you wanted to look this up prior to benchmarking, there is an online data collection worksheet that you can kind of select the property type that you have, and it'll pop up the additional information that you need. So for example, hotels, in addition to the basic information, they're going to ask, you know, whether you have laundry facilities, because that affects how your building uses energy, whether you have a gym or fitness center, the hours per day that guests are on site, whether there are meals served. So different types of buildings will have to input different types of information. And then just if, you know, if there is the ability to add multiple space types in Portfolio Manager, our recommendation is that less is more here, that you want to enter as few space types as possible. But there are some situations where you might break it out. And that is if a property use type that can get an Energy Star, if it's a property use type that can get an Energy Star score. So you may be a commercial building with retail on the first floor. Retail can get an Energy Star score separately only if it's greater than 5,000 square feet. So if you had a large retail facility, you may want to add that. If the space, if the multiple space takes up more than 25% of your gross floor area, you'd want to include it. If it's vacant or unoccupied office space, or if the operating hours are more than 10 hours different than the main operating use. So if you had like a 24-hour gym on the ground floor of your building, you'd probably want to break that out. So once you've gotten through adding all that kind of basic property information, your property setup is complete, and the next phase, you know, and then it'll take you to this My Portfolio page. which is kind of like the landing spot most of the time when you come into Portfolio Manager. So I think I'm turning it over to Rajiv to cover the next part of the presentation.
Thanks, Emily. So what I'm going to cover now is just the continuation of benchmarking your property. And on this slide, we'll be talking about adding those utility meters to a property in Portfolio Manager. So as Emily has highlighted here, we are creating the energy meters for a property so you can input your energy consumption data. So on this graphic, you'll see that there are several tabs there in your property. The energy tab is what we'll be focusing on, and you'll click that blue button that says add a meter. You can go to the next slide, Emily. So when you click add a meter, you're going to enter, Portfolio Manager is going to ask you about entering basic information about your building's energy sources. For most buildings, it's predominantly electric and natural gas, but every building is unique. So you need to make sure you're accounting for all the energy to track pertaining to your building. Some buildings may be all electric, some buildings may be a combination of electric and gas. If you are a building here in downtown St. Louis, you may be on the steam loop, so you're using district steam. So you just want to ensure that you are tracking all of the fuel sources for your property. So on this portion of the page, you'll be selecting all those fuel sources. Once you selected those fuel sources, you'll continue to enter basic information, where on this slide, for this example, we see that there's been 2 energy meters set up for the property. Looks like we've got a gas and electric meter. The blue arrow is pointing to the units, and that's pertaining to the units of consumption. So for natural gas, Spire actually has just updated how they track how they quantify the units of consumption. It's called CCF, that's 100 cubic feet. So for natural gas, you'll choose CCF. For electricity, you'll be using kWh, kilowatt hours. Next, after you enter in those units, it's going to ask you something called, it's going to ask you to enter the date the meter became active. This often trips folks up. As Emily has laid out on the slide, the date the meter became active should be the same as the start date of your first bill. It's not asking the historical installation date of when the meter was installed and became active. This is the start date of your very first bill. And as a reminder, with benchmarking, when you are benchmarking to comply with the city's ordinance, you're looking at calendar year data. So between January 1 and December 31st. Go to the next slide, Emily. So after you've done, the next step is selecting the meters to include in your metric. So for this example here shown on the slide, this property has 3 energy meters: a fuel oil, natural gas, and electric grid meter. So you're choosing all the energy meters that account for the total energy consumption for your property. As Emily says right here in all caps, don't forget this step. It's very important because you need to apply the meters selections. So when you report your data, we understand that you're providing the total energy consumption for your property. If you don't apply these meter selections, it'll look like you haven't entered any data when you've reported to the city of St. Louis. So this is just a very common issue that we see time and time when people submit and we don't have any energy consumption data for them. So your energy setup has been complete. Once it's been completed, you'll get a green notification bar up top that says, congratulations, energy meters you've selected have been successfully associated to your property. And then we're still looking at the energy tab here on the slide. So you can add and update your bills directly under this tab. There's a gray box that says meter summary. If you click the blue button that says enter your bills, it'll take you to your meters, or you can also see on the right side all the meters that you selected to compute your metrics. And you can see for this property, we've got that fuel oil, the natural gas, and the electric. You can click on each one individually to update the metrics for each meter. And one important note is anytime you see blue lettering in Portfolio Manager, if you put your cursor on it or you click on it, it'll give you directions or a definition. So it's very helpful in that regard. So again, for utility data, the ordinance requires annual calendar year data. So between January 1 and December 31. Now, that doesn't take into account, the tool doesn't take into account that billing periods don't line up with calendar years so nicely like that. So most likely you'll need about 13 months of bills, going back into December of 2020 or into the new year. You'll have to be gathering 13 months plus of bills. Water is a part of the ordinance requirements. It's benchmarking both your energy use and your water use. And again, you want to make sure you're accounting for all the fuel types, all the energy sources in your building. Water is billed here quarterly here in the city of St. Louis by our water division. So when you enter in water consumption data, you'll enter it in on a quarterly basis from the start and end date. Electricity, natural gas, and district steam. These are the four fuel types that are most commonly used to benchmark here in the city of St. Louis for the requirements of the ordinance. You can go to the next slide, Emily. So in Portfolio Manager, as we've previously seen, there's required fields for when you're entering that utility data: the start date of a bill cycle, the end date of a bill cycle, the usage, and the estimation. All four of those with an asterisk, as Emily has, are required fields in Portfolio Manager. You don't necessarily have to enter in cost data. It's not a requirement of the ordinance, but I strongly urge people to enter in that cost information, because it'll give you a better understanding of your overall costs for your property, and you can see how much money you're spending the tool will allow you to see the amount of money you're spending per square foot of your property. And for most building owners, their bottom line is one of their most important metrics. So if you can track your costs, I highly recommend to folks to enter in that information. So in terms of gathering your utility data, there's a couple options you have. If your company or your building, excuse me, if your company or your building keeps track of all the physical bills or the invoices that cover that calendar year, you can simply refer to those bills and manually enter in that data. You can access your data online. Ameren, Spire both have websites where you can set up utility accounts and you can download that information, or you can simply copy and paste it from their website. The St. Louis Water Division has a website, and it has an online portal where you can obtain your water utility data. Water, similar to gas, is measured by volume. Here in the city of St. Louis, they measure it in CCF, 100 cubic feet as well. Ashley Energy, which provides that steam usage and that steam data, that's measured in thousand pounds, KLBS. There is a form you can use to request aggregate steam data, but they also have a website where you can access that data online. Another option is accessing aggregate data, and that's monthly aggregated whole building data upon request. This is a service that Ameren and Spire offers. So when benchmarking first began, the city created what we call a utility release form, which is hyperlinked on this slide. And Emily will share these slides after this presentation. That utility release form is available on stlbenchmarking.com underneath the How to Comply section. You can fill out this two-page form to request that whole building aggregate data. It is aggregated data. It is anonymized, which helps privacy for multi-tenant or multifamily buildings, because as ratepayers, the utility data that we use is private information between you and the utility, but accessing aggregate data keeps that usage information anonymized. And it's easier to enter in that information under one aggregate meter for a property. So for example, if you like live in Park Pacific Plaza here in downtown St. Louis, there's hundreds of units in there. It would be really burdensome to create, hundreds of meters for each unit in there and benchmarking each meter for that associated unit individually. So in cases like this is where whole building aggregate data is really useful, because again, it aggregates it all anonymously under 1 meter. You can email this form to Ameren and Spire directly. These emails are written on the forms themselves. With Ameren, it usually takes about 3 to 5 business days from the time of request. With Spire, we've typically seen it going about a week from the time of the request. So the sooner the better you can request this information, the better for you to input it in. Now, there is also a fourth option, which is a relatively new option offered by Ameren. It's called the Benchmarking Energy Efficiency Portal, also known as BEEP. This provides a single point of entry for building managers to verify multiple electric accounts associated with one facility. So this is a portal that if you have a portfolio manager account, or once you create a portfolio manager account, this is a tool that can connect to your properties in Portfolio Manager and allows that upload of monthly aggregated usage data directly into Portfolio Manager. You can request up to 24 months of energy usage data. And once you've made that connection between BEEP, the BEEP portal, and your properties in Portfolio Manager, the data is automatically uploaded to BEEP on a monthly basis. So this eliminates the need of using that utility release form, going through boxes of paper bills to benchmark. It's a really, really neat feature, and it'll help building owners save time, especially for those who have large portfolio of buildings that have to comply, or a large portfolio of multifamily, multi-tenant buildings. So this is a really neat tool that Ameren's offered in the past couple of years, and the USGBC and Ameren work together on providing demos on how this tool functions. So in order to use BEEP, what do users need to know to access that data? You need to know all the service addresses associated with your building, as well as all the meter numbers. And those meter numbers and those service addresses come directly on your Ameren bills. But if you have an online Ameren account, you can view that information underneath your online account as well. And then the reason you need those service addresses and those meter numbers is to create what they call locations in BEEP. Account numbers for each service address. So you could access BEEP at beep.ameren.com, but for the account numbers for each service address, if the building has form, in regards about the account numbers, so it's just important to note that 4 accounts associated with that address, or 1 account if that building has 4 or more accounts associated with that address. So you just want to make sure you're keeping track of those. Actually, Emily, I think I'm tripping myself up on that one. Can you clarify about that one, about the 4 accounts or the 1 account number?
Yeah, I think it's that if the building has less than 4 accounts associated with it, which means it's going to probably be a pretty small building,
right?
You'd have to have all of those, I think. And if you have more than 4, I think you just need 1 account number in order to access the data.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. And again, this new tool, it's an online tool. You can access it at beep.ameren.com, and they do have a user manual that's available on their website for folks to use to set up your account and connect it to your portfolio manager account. So here we're adding, this is talking about continuing to add utility data to your existing meter. So this is just, again, showing this is the energy tab in Portfolio Manager. You can enter in your data through clicking on that blue button that says enter your bills, or you can go to each individual metric that's shown underneath the meters used to compute metrics to enter in your gas, electric, steam, or any other fuel types associated with your property. Again, this is just going over, the ways that you enter in that data. You can manually enter in that data or copy and paste it from your bills or from the online bills that Ameren and Spire both offer. And this is just showing you what it actually looks like. So those monthly entries here, it's showing you the start date, the end date, the usage. So right for this one example, we're looking at an indoor-outdoor one. This looks to be like water usage. So it's entering in gallons, and it's also tracking the costs. And entering that information in line by line can be, it can be tedious. So Portfolio Manager does offer you the ability to upload that data in bulk. So this is really helpful for folks who want to just like save it underneath one spreadsheet and upload it at once. One thing to note is that the electric and the natural gas upload templates are different. Where Emily's got that red circle, you can download that spreadsheet and enter in your utility data directly into that spreadsheet and just keep it saved on your computer. And every time you get new bills, just updating that template and then just uploading it when you're ready to comply with the benchmarking ordinance and send it off to the city when reporting. So after you've entered in your utility data and you've entered all your property use data, once you've met all the data requirements for benchmarking and you're ready to submit, we always suggest to folks, check for possible errors. So on this test property, underneath the summary tab, which is the first grade tab, there is a field that's called check for possible errors that you can click to run a data quality checker. Go to the next slide, Emily. So this slide right here is talking about water meters. We previously just went over how to set up your meters for energy. It's the exact same process for water. It's just housed and located underneath a different tab. The water tab, which is located to the right of the energy tab. You'll click add a meter. Here you can see for this test property that they've created a potable mixed indoor-outdoor water meter for this property. It's the exact same process, just underneath a different tab. So, once you've benchmarked, that data quality checker, a lot of it'll flag any data quality issues. And a lot of those issues tend to be, for what we've seen, are the following listed on the screen. These are the most common benchmarking issues that we see, is that one, if we see energy test scores of 1 or 100, those are highly suspect. So you want to check, your inputs that may deal with some of these bulleted points. There's incorrect gross square footage. There may be incorrect property use details, such as the number of operational hours, number of computers, number of workers in there. And those can vary by property usage. The property use details for an office building are different than a hotel or a restaurant or a data center. So you really want to make sure you have the most up-to-date property use details, because those property use details impact your overall energy score. And Portfolio Manager has suggested guidelines or thoughts on what they think are appropriate, metrics for a property use type. Now, again, those are their guidelines. Every building is unique and tailored. What they say is usual number of like refrigerators or freezers for a restaurant may be different than what your building actually has. So it's always important to check your property use details. Check if there's missing energy use data, if there's missing meters. Again, we talked about how if you don't apply those meter selections, it'll look like you didn't track any of your energy usage, and we won't see that on our back end when you report. Checking that you've got the right units for your energy and water usage. And also, human error happens. So check for any potential typos you may have in any of these inputs related to your usage data, your billing dates, or your property use details. Okay, so what we're looking up, where we'll be moving on now next is your building ID lookup. So this is related to compliance. Every building in our covered building list is assigned a unique St. Louis building ID. Those building IDs are attached to each property in our covered building list. There's over 1,000 buildings that have to comply with benchmarking. Each of them get their own unique building ID, and it's how we track compliance overall is using these unique identifiers. And you can find your building ID on the city's website, stlbenchmarking.com, and on the homepage, there's a function, there's a button that says building ID and address lookup, where you click on that and you can enter in your address and find your building ID and just put in some basic information, your name, your organization, your contact information, and we'll email you your building ID. You can go to the next slide, Emily. So once you've got that unique building ID, you'll go back into Portfolio Manager and enter it in. So in a property, once you're in Portfolio Manager, you've clicked on your property, there is what's called the Details tab in Portfolio Manager. On the left-hand side of the page, there's a gray box that says Unique Identifiers. In there, you'll see a couple fields, Portfolio Manager ID. This is one thing that trips folks up. Portfolio Manager ID is an ID that is automatically generated whenever you create a property in the tool. It's generated by the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, who oversees Energy Star. This is a tool of the EPA. Once you've gone to details, you'll go to this box and you'll want to enter in your standard ID section. There's a button that says edit. You'll click that blue button that says edit. So once you clicked edit, like I said, there's three sections. There's the Portfolio Manager property ID, there's custom IDs, and there's what's called standard IDs. This is where you enter in your unique St. Louis building ID. These standard IDs are used as part of our data requests by jurisdictions or organizations that have these laws in place. So you'll choose St. Louis building ID from the standard ID dropdown, and then to the field box to the right of that, it says ID. You'll enter in that unique building ID that starts with the P followed by six digits. And then once you've entered that in, you'll click save. So now you've benchmarked your building, you set up your property use details, you've entered in your utility information, you've gotten your building ID from us, the city, and you have entered in Portfolio Manager. So now it's time to report your data. You use the city's website. Again, stlbenchmarking.com is your one-stop shop for everything related to benchmarking. You'll go to the homepage and you'll click report data on the homepage of the website to submit your information. So you can go to the next slide, Emily. Once you click report data, you'll go to what's called a data request. You'll be responding to the City of St. Louis's data request. Here is an example from the 2019 year, City of St. Louis 2019 year benchmarking data request, where it'll show some instructions given by our staff. And if you go to the next slide, as you continue to scroll down on this data request page, the instructions will be up top, and then below it's going to ask you who is this data being submitted on behalf of. Most of the time you'll have myself, where like you're the building owner or the building representative who's benchmarking on behalf of the building. You'll choose someone else if you've got, you may be a third party. You could be an energy services company who's benchmarking on behalf of a building owner or on behalf of a portfolio of buildings. So that's what distinguishes the two. The time frame that you see here is locked by us, by the folks here at the city who create the data request. And then you'll be choosing below the time frame the properties. You may have one or you may have multiple properties, but this is where you select the properties in which you are reporting to the city. So once you've done that, you'll be what's called generating a response preview. On that previous slide, you couldn't see it on the bottom, but there's a blue button that says generate response preview. So it takes you to this page next, to the reporting section of Portfolio Manager. So for this property, a new response preview has been generated. It's that first row that you see, data request, City of St. Louis 2019. You're going to go to the action column and you'll select send response from that drop down menu once your preview's been generated. And then here, you're almost on the home, you're at the home stretch. You will first select your name or whoever's name is associated with your account so you can get a confirmation email. You can also enter in additional emails if you need to add your building owners, email your property management groups, anyone else who you think should get a copy of this information and also get a confirmation email. Secondly, it'll ask you what format would you like your data to be in for the email attachment. I highly recommend always keeping it in Excel. XML is a coding language. Here at the City of St. Louis, when we download your reports, we download it in XML and upload it to our database to filter out reported and non-reported and catch any potential data flags. So I highly recommend keeping it in Excel form. And then lastly, you will give an electronic signature for your data response before you can send the data. So you'll certify by clicking that checkbox that say, I hereby certify, I'm releasing my data about my properties to the building division. You'll enter in your username like Emily has here. You'll enter in your password and you'll click an e-sign button and then it'll reload the page and it'll show that you have signed the response, and then you'll click data and it'll ask you one more prompt that you are about to send your data to the Department of Public Safety, the building division, and then you'll click continue. And then once you've clicked continue, you've officially sent your data and you've been compliant for that reporting year. And the Office of Building Performance will, excuse me, the Office of Building Performance will follow up with you if there are any errors or issues with your submitted report in a timely manner.
Rajiv, before we move on to the next section, I think we have a couple questions specific to benchmarking.
Sure.
So Ike is here from Schnucks and he's new and doesn't have access to the login information. You have kind of a workaround for this, right? Or is that something you can help with since they've submitted their data before?
So just so I'm understanding, there was someone who was benchmarking your building before they had an account, and now you're trying to just retrieve that login information for Portfolio Manager. Yes, there is. Portfolio Manager offers a help desk. They can retrieve accounts themselves. I'll drop in the chat for you, Ike, the help desk where you can create a ticket to recover that login information.
Great, thanks, Rajiv. And then there's a question here from Brooke on if energy usage has changed due to system upgrades, how do you account for that? And I mean that your utility data will show that change. So you're just entering the utility data. I'm not sure if that, there may be more to that question. Brooke, if you want to unmute and ask.
No, I think my question was if there was an increase in your energy use, but the increase is not because of inefficiency, it's more on either a new upgrade or some kind of energy consumption that has changed in the building. how do you account for that to not affect your energy score? Maybe that's my question. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I was typing something in the chat could you repeat that question one more time, sir?
I don't want to take too much of your time. My question was, if we have an energy increase or energy use increase in the building,
Sure.
and it's not because of inefficiency or a waste, but it's more on a system upgrade, how do you account for that to not affect your scoring in terms of Energy Star score?
Oh, well, I mean, if there is increased usage, I mean, one, like you're just going to have to enter in the usage as the utilities are reporting that information. So how do you account for those changes? There isn't anything related to like normalizing. There are things the tool normalizes. It can normalize for occupancy changes. It can normalize for weather, but the system doesn't take in. Portfolio manager doesn't take into account like the increased usage from system upgrades. So if there is an increased usage, you're just entering that utility information as it's reported from the utility. But I can see if there's a better if portfolio manager has anything else to say about this, but as far as I know, there isn't really any way to account for those potential increases.
All right, thanks, Reggie.
All right, let's jump back into the rest of the presentation because we still have a little bit left to go. So we're going to shift and talk about the building energy performance standard now. And Rajiv, I think these are your slides for a little bit more.
Yep, you can go to the next slide. Excuse me. Okay, so what we're talking about now is, beginning this year or back in 2020, the city passed a new policy that builds upon benchmarking. It's called the Building Energy Performance Standards Ordinance. This slide right here shows a brief timeline of like the policy's development. This timeline shows July 2019, but we actually spent almost a year and a half developing the policy beginning in January of 2019. And this just shows how we met with numerous stakeholders on a bi-monthly basis to develop a next generation policy. What should we have building owners do after we've been collecting all this reported benchmarking information? It's great that we have this information, but it's simply just benchmarking is simply just an ordinance where you track and report. It hasn't mandated or required building owners to do anything to their buildings up until this point, and that's where this performance standards ordinance now comes into place. You can go to the next slide, Emily. Okay, so what is BEPS and what is this standard that we're speaking about? So again, BEPS stands for the Building Energy Performance Standard. The standard that our policy has is a metric called Site Energy Use Intensity, or EUI. This policy is what it does is it creates a legal requirement for all buildings 50,000 square feet and above in the city of St. Louis to meet a minimum energy threshold. You can think of it in parallel to fuel efficiency standards. There are fuel efficiency standards for cars. There's now here in the city of St. Louis, there are these minimum building energy performance standards for our large scale buildings. These standards are calculated so that at least 65% of the buildings have to improve their energy and performance. The standards were finalized last May and are available on the city's website. And Emily's got a hyperlink right here on this slide where you can access and view those standards. And these standards are for not by each individual building, but by property type. And so each building is associated with the various property types. So there are standards for offices, for non-refrigerated warehouses, for schools, for libraries, hotels, and so forth. And again, this law affects all commercial, institutional, multifamily, and municipal buildings 50,000 square feet and above. So this slide right here shows an infographic about the standard itself. So on the left, you'll see the property type group. What we've seen in benchmarking over the years, there are about 44 unique property types that we have here in St. Louis that submit annual benchmarking data. And so what we did with those property types is we created a methodology to come up with what we call these BEPS super categories, or these overall property types that have now been assigned that minimum energy performance standard, hence a BEPS. And so you can see all the property type groups here in the city of St. Louis that now have these minimum requirements. And the chart on the right, that distribution of site EUI values, that blue line is showing you the BEPS for each property type. So as Emily's got on the first one, college and universities, it's got a target of 113.8. That blue line represents that BEPS, and it's showing you how many buildings are at, below, or above that target. Anything to the left of that blue line means a building would be considered compliant, because again, as Emily said, Energy Star scores, the higher the number, the better. With EUI, the lower your EUI, the more efficient your building is. And so looking at this infographic, we've got a lot of schools, a lot of multifamily housing, a lot of non-refrigerated warehouses, a lot of warehouses in general, and a lot of office space. So there are this encapsulates, encompasses all of our property types and their associated standard. So again, EUI stands for energy use intensity, or the energy use per square foot. When you benchmarking generates your weather normalized EUI. And what that means is weather normalized. It's normalizing for weather conditions for buildings here in the city of St. Louis. It uses a 30-year average based on our location, because weather changes and it fluctuates. But so the tool Portfolio Manager allows for that normalization of weather conditions for this performance metric. So your current EUI right now, it will indicate how close you are to meeting that target for your property type. And so this goes into the last point, that reported benchmarking data is very critical. That local benchmarking data is foundational to us creating these standards. All of our standards are using local benchmarking data, except for 3. All of those standards use local benchmarking data. There were 3 where we used national benchmarking data, where we use national percentile data, simply because those property types, there's just not a large amount of them in our city. So we needed to use national data to come up with formulating those standards. Do I hand it? I'm still on this one, Emily? Yeah, okay. So next we're going to talk about the best compliance pathways and timeline. And I'm going to, Emily and I are going to try and speed through these so we can take questions from you guys. But again, as questions arise, please feel free to drop them in the chat. So we've got a couple different pathways and tracking components for the policy. In terms of compliance tracking, building owners will continue to use Portfolio Manager to document their compliance. We use that benchmarking data so we can see how close a building is to meeting or how far they are off from their target. There is a new dashboard that will be launched later this year for building owners to help comply. And this correlates to the compliance pathways, which I'll be talking about here shortly. Another thing that separates this ordinance compared to benchmarking is data verification. So data verification will be required when compliance is due. Building owners will have to obtain third-party, will have to get a third party to verify their benchmarking data, and verification is required at the end of each compliance cycle. So this, with benchmarking, there wasn't a verification component. We've built that into this benchmarking policy now, and building owners will have to be required to get their benchmarking data or their compliance pathway requirements verified by a third party. So any buildings who pursue an alternative compliance pathway, which we'll get into in a little bit, will be subject to additional verification requirements. So these next two slides cover the compliance pathways themselves. We like to describe them as in two buckets. So this first slide talking about that first bucket, the performance-based pathways. The first one is simply called the performance pathway. If you meet the standard for your building type within the 4 or 6 year compliance cycle, BEPS is measured in a compliance cycle. So for most buildings, they have 4 years to reach the target. For affordable housing and houses of worship, they've got 6 years to meet the target. So if you meet the standard and you maintain that level of performance during that compliance cycle, you'll be considered compliant. The second one is called rewarding early adopters. This is where if your EUI, if you are already at that target, and our targets are based on the 35th percentile of that weather normalized EUI by property type. If you're at or below that target and you reduce your consumption by an additional 20%, you can be compliant for cycles 1 and 2. If you go even further and reduce by an additional 50%, you can be compliant for cycles 1, 2, and 3. So this is really meant to incentivize those building owners to invest in their buildings now for long-term compliance. And these are what we would call our preferred pathways. Next, we'll talk about our second bucket, these alternative pathways. Now, we call them these alternative compliance pathways because if you, the building owner, are telling us, you know what, even though we've got 4 or 6 years to reach the target, I don't believe it's feasible for our buildings to reach the standard by the end of compliance cycle. And we understand that not all buildings will be able to reach the target by the end of the compliance cycle. So we've tried to build in some flexibility for building owners, hence why we have these alternative compliance, where you're not meeting a target, you're not meeting the standard, but you can satisfy compliance through these alternate pathways. This first one actually is just a typo. It says percentage reduction. It should be really called the narrow the gap. We'll fix that for future presentations. What this one is if you can't meet pathways 1 or 2, if you can reduce your 50% of the difference between your baseline performance and the standard, we'll treat that as compliant. So let's say, for example, the standard is 50, you're currently performing at an EUI of 100. If you can get to a 75 and show us how the projects that you'll do to meet that 70, to get to that 50% reduction, to narrow that gap, we'll treat that as compliant for this cycle. If this is still too aggressive for you, then there's a custom path where you will then be required to get an after-level audit done. You'll have to submit the results of that audit, the full audit report, the technical report. It will be approved by our Office of Building Performance, and then there will have to be an agreement between the building and our office on what energy conservation measures, or ECMs, must be completed by you. So these two pathways offer more flexibility for the building owner who can't reach the standard, but they will have much more stringent verification requirements and compliance requirements on the building owner. So most buildings will have to show compliance by 2025 when the reporting 2024 calendar year benchmarking data with that data. Again, houses of worship and qualified affordable housing will show compliance by May 2027 with their 2026 calendar year data. And building owners may apply for extensions so long as there's adequate justifications. As Emily touched on before, there are exemptions, as well as you can apply for extensions for a property. These extension the criteria for extensions are laid out in the ordinance, and our office will continue to provide further guidance for building owners so they understand this. So as part of the legislation, We've also created what's called a Building Energy Improvement Board. This is a 9-member board appointed by the mayor. This board is meant to work in conjunction with our office to assist building owners to comply. So the Office of Building Performance, after each cycle, they will reevaluate the standards and come up with new standards for this board to approve. They can review alternative compliance plans and make recommendations for approval or denial, and they'll work closely with our Office of Building Performance to work with building owners, specifically when it comes to alternative compliance. And they can also establish subcommittees if they feel they don't have enough expertise or knowledge to weigh in on an alternative compliance plan. And again, we've talked about this a lot already. I've mentioned it numerous times, but there is a dedicated new office within the building division, the Office of Building Performance. The mission of this office is meant to oversee the implementation, the compliance, and the enforcement of both benchmarking and BEPS. We will be the first, whenever a building owner submits an alternative compliance plan, our office will do that initial review and make judgments. We'll monitor and verify that submitted building information. We will publish annual reports, data visualizations, and scorecards of collected building data. Excuse me. And overall, we'll help navigate building owners through all the processes and systems associated with both laws. So we are meant to act as that compliance hub for building owners for both benchmarking and BEPS. So when it comes to working with our office and BEPS on ACPs, building owners are expected to submit a proposed alternative compliance path to our Office of Building Performance for that initial review. If that plan is adequate to our criteria, which is still being developed right now, the Office of Building Performance will approve, and the building owner will act on that plan, and they will use the forthcoming BEPS dashboard to document their plan, as well as for our staff to monitor. Agreed upon ACPs, whatever is agreed upon, those goals have to be completed by the end of a compliance cycle. If a plan is denied, a building owner will need to submit a new or a revised ACP for approval. Again, extensions are available. If a building owner has an issue with a judgment made by our office, they can appeal to the Building Energy Improvement Board to get a hearing for a proposed ACP. We are still right now formulating the full process for the appeal process, and that guidance will be coming out soon in a compliance guidebook that the office is currently developing and will release later this year.
All right, thanks, Rajiv. I'm going to take us through a few more slides, but I'm going to go quickly because I'd like to open it up for any questions. So now that we've talked through the requirements of the Building Energy Performance Standard, we just want to point out some different things that people can do to get ready for that. It's kind of right around the corner. One is making sure that your benchmarking data is correct, and that's important. Consider an energy audit to fully understand building characteristics and opportunities. Start identifying energy conservation measures. If you don't already have an internal team working on this, good time to get started on planning and how you'll implement things. And then looking at opportunities for energy management and an energy management plan. And if you do have tenants, it's a good time to start engaging building tenants around energy use and energy conservation. The city also has some scorecards available for buildings that have reported data. So this is something that these have been emailed to building owners in the past, and it will show you some statistics about your building, and it will show you your energy usage over the past few years, as well as the BEPS target for your building type. The scorecards have been updated to show that information. So you can see here, this is the civil courts building that's owned by the city. And the BEPS target is 112.3. So, maybe that line comes up here. They've got a little work to do perhaps before they meet that standard. I'm not going to talk through these in detail, but just looking at opportunities to create and implement a plan to reduce energy use. There are a lot of ways that you can do this through operations and conservation measures. There are some lower cost and quick payback options, like lighting retrofits if you haven't done this, or tune-ups or retro commissioning. And then obviously there's the kind of places to invest that when you're actually replacing heating and cooling equipment, you want to go with the most efficient thing that you can. We also will continue to provide education and training. We've got a couple more sessions just like this that we'll repeat this session again in April and May. And then we are offering some more benchmarking carousels, which are just kind of ways, short presentations on how people can save energy in their buildings. And then we also have a really great training, this G-Pro operations and maintenance training, which really will dig kind of deeper into maintaining and operating your building in a sustainable manner, including addressing energy conservation and energy efficiency efforts. So just want to point those out. And then finally, or not finally, just one more slide after this. We are actually, USGBC is actually excited to be launching the Building Energy Exchange St. Louis, which is a new initiative to assist buildings that have to comply with BEPS. And it will be available to all building types, not just those that have to comply, and not just those in the city, but that is really kind of the main focus first off, is to really help the buildings that have to comply with BEPS, especially those that may need a little extra help. We have an official launch planned, an event on March 23rd at the History Museum, and I'll send a link to that in the follow-up. But the building division and the Energy Improvement Board will continue to provide compliance documents for building owners. There's going to be some guidance document coming out soon. And there are financial tools currently available that could be helpful. We do have PACE in the city of St. Louis. The Department of Energy at the state level has a great revolving loan fund for schools and hospitals and local governments. And then there's a nice financial assistance report that Renew, Missouri, and Tower Grove CDC had put together that I can also share in my follow-up. And then we have some great resources through our utilities to implement energy efficiency and get rebates or incentives for those. So I encourage people to take advantage of the incentives and rebates that Ameren and Spire offer. And I'm going to put up contact information here, and we can open up for questions if people have additional questions. Any questions? I think there was an early question about demand when we're talking about electricity and the benchmarking section. I'm not sure if Hank, you want to unmute to ask that question, or I see we also have another question about who is required to report data, the landlord or tenant. And technically the ordinance does require the owner to report, the building owner. So if the owner delegates that to landlord or building management, that's often the case, but it's not the tenant.
Hi, this is Hank. What I was trying to ask there is, when I'm inputting my electric energy usage, it's a total number of dollars in there when you put that in, but those dollars include a lot of different things, the demand and stuff like that. So does that matter, or are you just interested in kilowatt hours and dollars? because demand plays a factor in your billing and efficiency too, doesn't it?
Yeah, so like that electric demand, I know it's like utilities typically charge, commercial customers both the quantity and then the rate of electricity consumed. So that the electric demand is the rate of using electricity, and then demand cost is the cost that you were charged for that demand on a bill. But for benchmarking, like the electric demand, like those are optional fields for the purpose of complying with the ordinance. Those are optional fields in Portfolio Manager. You certainly don't have to track it when reporting to the city of St. Louis. For us, we just care about like the consumption between that billing cycle, and then the associated cost for the amount consumed in that billing cycle. Does that make sense, Hank?
Yeah, so basically you don't care how quickly we consume it. You just want to know how much of it we consume.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. I just break my neck when I'm trying to do this, and it's like, okay, what do they really want here? Thank you, Rajiv. Good luck with your new position.
Thank you. And, also continue to, reach out to our office because, we don't want you to be breaking your neck, Hank. It can be tedious. And especially if you own like a bunch of properties, but the office is meant to support you guys on this policy. So if you've got questions, never hesitate to reach out to us.
Fortunately, for me, it's been not too bad, but you have been a huge help. I really appreciate it, both in this building and the one I came from originally. So thank you.
Thanks, Hank.
Any other questions? No other questions. All right, well, I will follow up with an email that includes a link to this presentation. I have it in Google Drive because it's just too big to send as an attachment, but I'll also include a couple of links to resources as well. And if folks have follow-up questions, I'll also include contact information for Katerina and James and myself in that email. And you can please feel free to reach out to any of us if you have questions or need additional information. So, thank you all for coming, and enjoy the nice weather this week.
Thanks, everybody.